Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on digital citizen. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. David Schumacher and Mr. David Smith. First, I would like to give chance Mr. David Schumacher.
Yeah, good morning to the other David, and good morning, Dr. Sharif. And good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day you're watching this live or on replay. Got to think about those things. World is the first name here, so we take that into account. So today's topic is digital citizenship. And I thought I had a good idea what that meant. I found that by looking around on the internet just to check my assumptions, that there were a few varied definitions. Some of the definitions that I came across were from academic programs, usually aimed at youth. And the term citizenship and digital citizenship reminded me of the citizenship classes that I had at a younger time in school. They weren't so much about I'm getting some background noise. Could we mute maybe the other mics? Yeah, that helped a lot. Okay, thanks. So digital citizenship, the citizenship part of that reminded me of the citizenship classes that I was given early in school. And they weren't so much about becoming a national citizen, but more like the responsibilities and how to handle myself in civil society. And even though there's some very good definitions out there of digital citizenship, that tends to be more what I see it being. It tends to be seeing it as the responsible citizen of the digital culture. So a lot of that has to do with good behavior, but also has to do with smart behavior, because there's so much of what's available out there in the digital world these days. Commerce, how to protect yourself in digital commerce sites, how to protect yourself against scams, how to communicate with others in a way that fosters communication and not just one-sided arguing, how to be literate in the digital world, how to differentiate between what's real and what's fake out there, and how to have conversations that lead to balance, that lead to something productive. Some of that has to do with etiquette. Some of it is even legal. In any society, there are rules, there are laws, and there are consequences for running up against those laws. So digital citizenship is part of knowing that too. But I think it goes beyond that to more ethical and empathetic communications with others. We've seen movements to stop cyberbullying, for example. We've seen movements to stop what could be considered hate speech or something along that line. So we're looking to be able to protect ourselves, to protect others, to not inflict any particular harm, and to do so in a responsible way. And that term responsible keeps coming up over and over if you do a search for digital citizenship. And part of that has to do with digital security, which David Smith has spoke on many times. And that's part of earning your wings, so to speak, as a digital citizen. So there's some opening thoughts, Dr. Sharif. And I'll now mute myself.
Thank you. And now I request Mr. David Smith.
Well, David, thank you for the nice words on some of the topics I tend to keep going back to because they're so important in today's digital connected age. And I do like that David and David show because we'll both look up when someone says David. But I love how he set it up and some of the elements to it, because he's given some of the types of definitions of digital citizenship. And digital citizen has a lot of different meanings. And, he touched upon some of them. And one of them was from actually a book called Digital Citizenship, the Internet Society and Participation. And the definition there is those who use the internet regularly and effectively. And effectively, I found was a very interesting use, because I think sometimes in today's world, it's very difficult to use the internet effectively. I mean, when I get my screen reports back and see how many hours I spent on social media, sometimes I'm wondering effectively is the right word there, and some of the other uses that I could be using. But effectiveness is one of the words there. So in another definition, a digital citizen is a person using IT, information technology, in order to engage in society, politics, and government. What I find interesting about that definition is it doesn't mention work. So I'm a digital citizen if I use it in society, politics, and government, but I'm something else if I use it for work, even though the principles to me that David talked about and others should play. You know, I kind of like the definition that I've seen recently, that digital citizenship is the self-enactment of people's roles in society through the use of digital technology, stressing the empowering and democratizing characteristics of the citizenship idea. And again, that is a definition that to me, again, has some very interesting nuances to it, and how you have to read it and how you have to be involved with it. But I really think if I go back and uh, think about when did citizenship become much more important, and 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 what niches is digital citizenship used? You know, David said he searched the internet and looked at a lot of different things. What I did was kind of interesting. I looked at usage of terms in a search tool that is a more scholarly search tool. The vast majority of the places where the term digital citizenship is used, the digital citizen is used, is in education. And that surprised me a little bit, but that is the vast majority of where the term is used. And, you know, if you go back and think about the COVID pandemic, it led to business and school closures, which, which necessitated the increased use of technology for telework and online learning. And that trend has done nothing but continue. You know, we see even in the commercial sector, people returning to the office, the rates are still down less than 30% in the United States, at least, of workers returning to offices and stuff. So, you know, the technology use is continuing to raise, and it's increasingly important to be knowledgeable about how to use it correctly. And I think that is the part is that when the COVID hit, it became real apparent that a lot of society, a lot of the teachers, a lot of the students, a lot of the workers really did not understand how to work in an environment where you were doing it all through technology, where there was not a classroom, where there was not people sitting in offices or in desks next to you, and where those things didn't work. And so Digital Citizen began to lay out principles of ways for educators, government workers, and students and people using the technology on how to understand how we should use the technology appropriate. And particularly in education, one of the education leaders had a great comment. He believes that a digital citizen is more than just a teaching tool. The technology is more than a teaching tool. It's a way to prepare students for a society full of technology. And with the correct use of the internet, adults, leaders, students can be more aware of human rights violations and how to protect themselves from fraud and disinformation. And so in many ways, it goes back and says a digital citizen is more about these are the principles you should apply when you're online. These are the etiquette that you should use. These are the things you should look out for and avoid. This is where fraud happens. This is where cyber crimes happen. This is where privacy can be corrupted and things. And these are the appropriate ways to do it. So when I was thinking about this, and I have a feeling I'm going to get a laugh from David on this one. What digital citizens reminded me of is back when I was young, long time ago, we had charm school. You had charm school for girls, you had charm school for boys, and you went to them to learn this is how you use how you set a table for dinner. This is where you put the knives, the forks. When someone offered you something, this is what you did. These were definitely things you don't do. Uh, you know, as much as I would like to pick up that piece of meat and eat it with my hand, that was not acceptable in charm school. But the same type of things as digital citizens is part of the goal of this is to teach you what you should do, what you should not do, what to look out for, what to say, and what not to say. And in today's digital citizen, it cannot be as simple as the charm schools were then, because digital citizenship today is global. And so the way we do some of our things globally are going to be different. I know if I go to South America, I have to say and do things differently than I do here in Austin, Texas. When I come over and visit Sharif, and I probably go and travel to a couple of other of my favorite countries there, they do things differently than I do here in Austin. The same when I'm in EU. I recently had a friend fall ill in Marta, and he had to go to the hospital. Well, his wife was not allowed to go into the hospital at all with him under that country's rules. The patient rights were not the same as they are here. The amount of information exchange is not the same. But the same is true as you look at digital citizenship around the world. You're going to have different rules. If I go into I'm sorry, if I go into China today, their rules for a digital citizen is extremely different than they are in the United States, which is different than in India and other countries where we have different rules on what we can do in the digital domain. So, Sharif, you can see there's a lot to unpack in digital citizens, but like I said, I was very surprised that the vast majority is in education. And because it is in education, it kind of brings me into this comparison between a digital citizen and charm school back in the old days, because they have many similar characteristics, but just that a digital citizen is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it's international from the very first time you get on. So to me, that is some of the differences, Dr. Sharif.
Mr. David Schumacher, digital humanism. What do you mean?
Yes, I saw that by Jason. Thank you so much for putting that out there. As I'm interpreting Jason, and maybe he can add some more comments or even come and join us. I think what he's talking about is just being a good person, being a good human in the digital world. And I'd be interested if that's what he had in mind. But that is uh, maybe a little bit of a summation from my viewpoint of David's talk. And yes, Charm School did bring a smile to my face when you talked about that. I do remember early on, it wasn't called that, but it was definitely called how to act politely, in this society. So Well, I see David's dropped away for a minute, so I'll quit saying nice things about him since he can't hear him, and I'll go on and pick up on his point about COVID. COVID seems to come up over and over in these forums because it did force us to find alternate means to be able to communicate and do so many other things. I made my living in the IT world. Well, first in general technology in the U.S. military, and then after retiring from the U.S. Air Force, where I was introduced to computers and networking and servers and so on, I went on to do a civilian career in IT. So for my age group, I felt more digitally fluent than many of my contemporaries. But COVID took a lot of people, whether at whatever level that they were at, and forced them into the digital world. If you're of my age group and you wanted to communicate with your grandchildren or your children, then perhaps you did that over Zoom or some other type of video conferencing program. So it was a rather abrupt introduction into the digital world for some people, and not so abrupt for others, speaking on an individual basis. Now, companies, corporations had been digitizing because of business advantage for quite some time before COVID. The one that I was working with at the time and the one previous to that had both spent significant amounts of money to develop digital infrastructure. They decided that instead of building additional brick and mortar facilities for, say, call center activities or other programs that lent itself very well to IT, they were investing heavily in that and training people beforehand. So when COVID came along, they already had many people that were already working from home. And as brick and mortar facilities had to shut down or restrict activity, then a lot more of that work went on to those people that were already working at home. And IT then had to be able to push out solutions to be able to send more people home. And the training departments inside the company had to change their way of training new people so that they could work from home much quicker, or maybe even exclusively right from the beginning. So that forced us into a digital world. But we were fortunate, I think, that corporations, businesses had already been doing that because they'd laid the structure. At least in the business that I was in, we had surplus capacity, maybe not a lot, but we had some surge capacity, which allowed us to be able to absorb that. And then for those of us that were in the infrastructure area, then we were building more of that infrastructure to be able to do this. How's digital citizenship apply to this? People that were working in an office and talking to people over the phone or through some other mechanism had to learn a different way of doing things. And not only did they have to learn the technical aspects of how to do that, but they had to learn the corporate citizenship way of doing that. How do you handle yourself on a video call versus on a telephone call? And those are citizenship requirements. Those are citizenship necessities in that corporate world that came along, people learning to do a new way of business. So COVID helped in that regard, but it helped those that were already helping themselves from the beginning, I think. Pardon me, I'm a little froggy today. That already had helped themselves by doing some investment in training and infrastructure, software, and other areas that were associated to being able to work remotely. At the same time, we also had people that go out and help businesses that contract on an individual basis. And many of them were already working from home because you could cover far more clients. And then there was a new way to handle that. So that's another aspect of digital citizenship. But one that I've talked about on this show a while back, and it's been a while, has been talking about digital government. So when you think of citizenship in a generic form, I think of citizenship to a nation state. And what that means. My partner, Susan, who's from New Zealand, has been living in America for a long time, finally got her got her citizenship not too long ago. And she had to go through citizenship classes and had to learn a bit about American history and laws, Constitution, and had to become immersed to become the kind of nation state citizen. Well, we do that in this digital world too, where we have to learn what the laws are, we have to learn what the customs are, and we have to learn how to help and how to stay out of trouble. The country of Estonia is where I was going. I talked about Estonia some time ago, and I've written some papers on Estonia because they're really the first country to have a digital government. Sure, they have government offices. You can still go in person, but they provide access to as much of the country as possible for all of their citizens. You can conduct all government business, including voting in elections, with a blockchain ledger. And this was done long before the pandemic. Their investment in going from, because Estonia was previously a Soviet satellite state and had very rudimentary technology, and they decided the best way forward into the 21st century was to invest heavily in IT, digital infrastructure, and to bring that to as many people as possible. And by converting government services and converting everything that could be converted, they were able to move much faster than if they had tried to do it in a conventional way. And they also had a lot to learn along the way. They originally started off without blockchain ledger capabilities for their voting. But just like corporate citizenship during COVID, training people in how to act in the corporate environment towards their corporate customers, Estonia did that long before COVID with their own citizenship in a much broader way across the country. So there's a couple of models, I think, for practical digital citizenship. We can go in and we can talk about the different things that were required both for corporations and for countries doing this. Digital access was a big thing, maybe far more so for the country of Estonia going to a digital government than, say, Fortune 500 companies that I've worked for and worked with here in the United States, which had perhaps a different well of resources and a different history with IT infrastructure. So two very different ways to go about bringing those populations into the digital world for very solid benefits. And perhaps somehow this all relays back to Jason's comment on digital humanity, because that's where we're going. Digital in the sense that we see today, digital in the exponential sense of what's coming tomorrow, and maybe that'll be for an interesting topic on the next go around. So there's some more thoughts, Dr. Sharif, on digital citizenship.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I'm request Mr. David Smith.
Thank you. I just lost internet for a while, which is a very also important comment on the world of digital citizens and digital citizenship, because it's not always consistent and it's not always dependable when you think it should be. But I agree with the commenters I've heard here as we go forward. Also, going back into the side, coming back with some of the things I talk about with the privacy, the security, and others. So in 2020-21, the United States, the Federal Trade Commission here received almost 3 million fraud reports of fraud on the internet related to the whole definitions around digital citizenship and how that could be used. And there was a rise in fraud and in misinformation and disinformation and in cyber attacks because of the increased people beginning to become more digital savvy because of the pandemic. And that's, for example, part of what they try to teach in digital citizenship is to help people choose credible and valid sources. Uh, and in looking at the education sector again, there was a research done by Stanford University here that found that looking across 14 different states in the United States, less than 10% of people verified an online source's credentials with anything. And so you saw that, and that's one of the reasons they believe that digital citizenship uh, education is necessary because it protects others from being uh, taken advantage of it with it. And for example, in Canada, uh, over 99% of students from 4th to 11th grade uses the internet at home. And with this high percentage of people using it, in this raise of technology, it shows the importance of being knowledgeable about fraud, cybersecurity, misinformation, disinformation. And in Canada, in multiple of the regions, there is now a course called Digital Citizenship Education, and it's there. And you can see that being used. And this, what is happening in schools, really needs to begin to be extended more and more across the rest of society. How it's being used commercially, how it's being used in government, how it's being used in just day-to-day life. I am often appalled when I talk to people about online social media, how few of them understand that and how they do that. Um, as some of you know, one of my companies called Universal Tutor, we teach social and emotional learning. And particularly when you look at being a digital citizen, it is one of the places where that is extremely important because social emotional learning, you use skills like empathy, consideration, uh, responsible decision making, and others to use in life, and particularly in the digital domain. Empathy and responsible decision making is exceedingly important. And again, during the pandemic, we saw social and emotional learning take a nosedive in being able to use. The other thing is today, our social life is just not our bricks and mortar social life, but so much of social life now takes place not just in person and on the phone, but across multiple apps, messaging apps, text, WhatsApp, Messenger, through social platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, others. This has really profound impacts on how we uh, as digital citizens use these services. And it particularly has impacts not for just the children and young people today, but also the senior citizens, also the ones across the whole thing. And it's both now and the future that we have this impact. I hire a fair amount of people, and I and other employees typically look at part of the individual's social media accounts as a hiring criteria. Colleges look at students' digital footprints to determine admission. Law enforcement look at them for the same reasons. And so it's really important for us to understand that our digital citizenship, our digital citizens, are taking into account in many, many different parts of our lives. And it implies responsibility to those of us who are using it. Because people who are using it, everyone on this broadcast today and listening to this broadcast and watching it, are digital citizens. And we are all members of a community whom I think we owe each other a standard of conduct and consideration, and what we have to do with it, and how we can practice it, and how we can be part of this greater vision of what a digital citizen is. Uh, it's kind of like knowing to open the door for an elderly person. Uh, Part of digital citizenship is helping understand that we have to help inform and not take advantage of those who are not as digital savvy as others. So, Sharif, I think this is part of where I see some of the differences going.
Thank you, Mr. David Schumacher.
There we go. Yeah, thanks, David. Good comments. Appreciate those. I want to leverage off of that perhaps just a little bit and talk about some things that digital citizens have to do. And David is right. David Smith is right in saying that all of us are digital citizens at some point, but we also need to keep honing those skills. And they're not always obvious, I think, as one might think they are. I'll give you an example. I served on a board, company board, some years ago. Well, actually, not that long ago, maybe 10 years ago. So the digital world was on us then as well. And we found that for all the challenges that we had in the activities before the board, the biggest challenge was communicating amongst ourselves. We were all of the age group that had grown up communicating in a more manual, less digital style. Yet, members of this board had access to, of course, text messaging and email and good old fashioned telephone calls. And everybody had a little bit different style. So, this was another case where a situation required some type of common understanding about how to use the digital environment that was around us. So we had, fortunately, access to a university professor that taught on communication, and we had them come in and address the board. And she did a fine job, and it really broke down into something that might seem to be rather, uh, I don't know, obvious, for lack of a better word. She said the whole idea was when you use the telephone, uh, should that be pressing or not? Should that be time bound or not? The same thing with digital texting and the same thing with email. So, for example, we went through and we talked about what the expectations were for each person on the board for using these things. Some people thought that if you wrote an email message, that you should get a response back right away. Or if you texted somebody, it should be almost instantaneous to get back. And that telephone might have been too hard to use or too difficult to be able to loop in 2 or 3 different people. That was one example of the different disparity of thoughts about the different communication mechanisms. So we came out with guidelines after quite a bit of talk and decided that we would use email to talk about anything at length that required a fair amount of nuance and did not require an immediate response. In our particular group, we said that it was adequate to have a 3-day response, if I remember right, to an email. Because not everybody on that board checked their email every day. Some maybe had an administrative assistant that checked it for them. And there was quite a bit to go through. So 3 days seemed to work out pretty good. For a text message response, no, we agreed that the idea of instant messaging, if you will, with text messaging wasn't what we were going to do. We would expect a response on a text message if something was directed to a person within a day. If you had something that was time bound, very short time bound, then it was a matter of picking up the phone and calling maybe individually the people that needed to be brought into the discussion and then arranging perhaps for an online meeting. So we set up a hierarchy of telephone was most immediate, text messaging was in the middle, and then email, we had a few days to be able to respond to such things. And it took quite a bit of contention out of that. And I bring that up as an example of how simple things of being a digital citizen are important. That's why I talked about in the previous round about how corporations set expectations for people working at home, whether that was COVID or non-COVID, people working from home had certain expectations that might be different for people that were working in the brick and mortar facilities. So communication expectations is one part of digital citizenship. And that goes hand in hand with another thing, which I think is digital health and wellness. When telephone and written snail mail, regular postal mail, was the order of the day, and you went into a brick and mortar office building, it was pretty easy to regulate your time. If you had to be there at 8 o'clock, for example, and took an hour lunch break or a half an hour lunch break in the middle of the day and then went home at, say, 5 o'clock, your separation between your personal time outside those hours and your business time inside those hours was pretty obvious. Now that we carry around a smartphone in our pocket, maybe we carry around a tablet, maybe we have, something like a smart wristwatch, we can have instant communication that can go across those things that I was talking about, from email, text, and telephone, tied to our bodies 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We as digital citizens have to learn to moderate that. Those expectations may be set by an employer. They may be set by customers in your business that you serve if you're a business owner. But ultimately, you're the one that determines those for yourself. And that is the health and wellness part. Because while it may sound noble to be available to your customers 24/7, 365, it's not healthy for you. And in the end, it's not noble because you're going to be providing less worth to your employer or your customers overall. So on many new smartphones, you can set up routines. You can set up a routine that says, for example, at 10 o'clock at night, I'm going to switch my phone from light mode to dark mode. I'm going to turn off all essential calls. I'm going to silence notifications that aren't pressing. Back in my days doing systems engineering, I had to have a notice going 24/7, 365 for my server farm. But outside of that, everything else went on a pause. It could wait until the following morning, which helped me. I can set a routine that says between 8 and 5 office hours that I respond in a certain way, and I can help those, or I can just make those decisions myself if I don't have the technology and the smartphone to be able to do that, which many do these days. But it's still up to me to decide what those boundaries are going to be so that I can be healthy and to respect other people's boundaries that are set up to do that. As a business owner, it might be seductive to be able to say that you can reach out and touch your key people at any time of the day or night, but that may not be what's most productive for you as well. So not only do you need to set it for yourself, but you need to be mindful of setting those for maybe family, friends, coworkers, employees, so that we do stay healthy and we do stay well in this digital age. And we can go on to talk about other technological advancements too, like blue light filtering. I have Kick on at sunset on my devices, keeping volume levels at a respectable range. There's a lot of different things that we can do as digital citizens to manage these devices. Plenty of practical aspects. And that's where I'll leave it for this round.
Thank you. Mr. David Smith.
Well, Sharif, I agree with everything that's being said, and this is just a topic that we could go on with for quite a while as we look at some of it. What I might best do here is go back to where I was talking earlier and maybe talk about some more from, well, my perspective of what this type of digital citizen, what type of concepts does it include? You heard me mention a few last time. One of it is empathy. Is as I think about the interactions I see online, as I see in text messages, as I see in messaging, as I see in social media, as I see in emails usage all the time. One of the skills we really need to teach in digital citizens is empathy. It's really a critical factor because some of the things David was talking about, particularly the fact that you have these intermediating effects of digital environments. It can be instantly, and you want to respond instantly. Uh, and so oftentimes it's too easy for us to think when we're involved with this that, for example, we're responding to a post that Dr. Sharif you made. And so I'm not thinking about I'm responding to you, Dr. Sharif. I'm responding to the entire Facebook community in a form of empathy there. And that's a very different consideration than how you and I would act if we were in person and doing this. Another way is we need to understand how the internet works. It doesn't have to get too technical, but we need to understand where websites are maybe in real space in bricks and mortar, how their information moves around. Uh, how does it do it? You'll have a better grasp of what's happening when you post, when you download or comment, and understanding what's happening behind the scenes. And that, for example, messages go through multiple computers as they go across the internet. And because of that, the opportunity for cybercrime and other things dramatically goes up as you do that. There's also needs to be an understanding of your data and what is your user data and which is not. And the understanding of your data is a real important part of how the modern internet works. Almost all websites collect some data from us. Some, like social media sites, collect large amount of data, including uh, not just our personal data, but who we have as friends, who our friends have as friends. What do we buy? What ads do we click on? What type of pictures do we like? Where do we travel? Because you can see, because we tend to use our social media when we travel. Businesses collect a lot of information on the internet, location, usage, personal data, and they often sell it to partners. So what's the relationship? Do we have our data? Do we own it or control it? What are the laws on this? What are the national laws? What are state laws on it? And it really understanding your data really opens the door to educate us on how it can be misused by data mining, identity theft, all other types of these things. And it kind of lets us realize we need to have more control over our data and how to better stay safe online. Next one is we need to practice digital literacy more. And digital literacy is really analogous to media literacy. It means reading information online with the understanding of what it means, who wrote it, where it originates, what purpose was it meant to serve, and for whom, and whether it's accurate or not. Uh, Part of digital citizenship is helping reduce the spread of misinformation, hate speech, others like that. And this is also a place where digital citizenship, you need to learn about ethics, online self-protection, cyberbullying. David mentioned this, and I'll mention it again. We need to acknowledge the digital divide. But for example, in the United States, only about 75% of us have good, reliable internet access. After my experiences today, it might be lower than that. but these divisions are based on devices too, and different ways we can do it. We have to practice digital wellness. Digital wellness means prioritizing our own and others' well-being when using digital devices and the internet. I can tell you, I was out at dinner last night, and the two of us were looking around us, and it was very interesting. Probably 70% of the tables around us, the people were not talking to other people at the table. There were tables with 4 or 6 people at it, and they were only looking at their mobile devices and interacting with their mobile devices and not talking to each other. And I think that is a thing that we have to understand even more. I have seen couples in the same house, a room apart, fight over text messages instead of walk into the next room and talk with each other. And that's part of digital citizenship that I think is just really interesting because you're not practicing digital wellness. And, you know, it's really hard. But the other analogy on this that I really love is in the past, um, for example, my great grandparents and others had difficulty attaining food. Salt, sugar, fats were hard to uh, obtain. But now most of us worldwide can easily access high fat, high salt, sugary food, which is damaging to our own health like before. So we have to practice well-being and not eating those foods. The same thing with our digital thing. Early days of the internet, it was really hard to access content. Now I can access content anywhere, any different twist, but we've got to go ahead and practice digital wellness. And finally, we have to secure our digital devices. It's using antivirus programs, using firewalls, using gateways, using VPNs, regularly changing your passwords and the way you do it, understanding data phishing, social engineering, antivirus, anti-malware technology, and how you can do that and why they're important. So to me, Sharif, this is some of the other concepts that we have to teach each other as digital citizens. And I hope that helped your viewers.
Thank you. Mr. David Schumacher, what's your concluding remarks and how you want to advise the emerging economy, from Transhumanist Party? Mr. Tom Rose already in Dhaka. So I believe you see he visiting the Prime Minister office to central bank to largest corporations, largest universities. So I believe it's some of the big revolutions in emerging economy on behalf of Transhumanist Party. So what's your view about this tour and how you want to contribute for this emerging economies youth communities?
Well, we think along the same lines because the Transhumanist Party is synonymous with looking at the future, the near future, the far future, and being prepared for it. And I certainly see some of that going on. I'm very happy to see Tom there, one of our directors participating. When we go back to digital citizenship for the future, I think things that we need to think of is, yes, there is a future and the future is unfolding before us. Just like the tools that were available for communication to our parents, those certainly have evolved to us and have evolved even further for our children and still for us, for those that are still here. All right. So what kind of things are on the horizon? What type of improvements in digital communications, digital interactions are going to be available to us? And I think if you stop and think about it, if you just contemplate with the things that are in the news, you can get some ideas of the things that we need to be planning for the future. For example, how is augmented reality, virtual reality going to affect the whole digital citizenship landscape? Let's say that I'm in those meetings with you and Tom, Dr. Sharif, And if I'm wearing a pair of augmented reality glasses that I hope to have soon, I'd be able to look around the room and be able to have in my glasses, and I do have a pair of augmented reality glasses here somewhere, and I'd be able to perhaps, oh, we're getting a little background noise again. I'd be able to look into those virtual reality glasses and perhaps get names of people that I'm looking at, maybe even help with pronunciation for those names, something I personally need to have. So augmented reality will be able to allow me to do in-person communication better because of digital aspects. Virtual reality, that's a little bit further down the road, the way I see it, for being able to handle this, but augmented reality is on the horizon, and it's a tool for us as digital citizens wanting to stay current are going to need to start looking at. The other one that's really prevalent, I think, in the media today has to do with artificial intelligence because of the release of Chat GPT-4. You can go online and you can use Chat GPT for free and get some idea of what its capabilities are. And I would encourage anybody watching this program to do that and not just take some of the information that you see in the media as your total understanding of what an AI tool like that can do for you. And then start thinking with that entrepreneurial mindset that I like to talk about of how can I utilize this personally and how can I utilize this in business. ChatGPT is very good at text, so perhaps I can use it to help me explore possibilities that I hadn't thought of before. Perhaps it can help me express my ideas about topics in a way that's more efficient than I could do on my own. Perhaps there's a business idea that you could use to incorporate to take this forward. And this is all part of digital citizenship. But there's other types of artificial intelligence that are out there. DALL-E 2 is really interesting, I think, as far as image generation. So I like to speak on topics. Writing on topics, I've used digital assistants to help me with that for years, to help me correct my grammar and word usage and spelling. And now there are better tools out there to help get my subject across even better. DALL-E 2 can do that same thing for artwork. I have a good friend that just, well, actually she published this some time ago, 2 or 3 books that she went and had illustrations done for. And the illustrations are just marvelous. But imagine being able to write your own work and do your own illustrations for those of us that are graphically challenged, so to speak, by using some type of an automated tool to do that. And maybe if the automated tool still isn't good enough, you can take this to a professional illustrator and have a good basis where you can show them and say, this is kind of what I'm thinking of, but I need your help to put the final touches on. Think about this. The use of these type of digital tools is just very much a part of being a good digital citizen, as any of the other things that we've talked about today. So I wanted to talk about 2 things coming from the future that we need to think about now, because the future will be on us quicker. The time that it took to go, say, from DALL-E 3, to go from ChatGPT 3 to 4 is going to be a longer time period, or another way of saying it, it's going to be a shorter time period to go to 4 to 5, and a shorter time period from 5 to 6. I'm just using one example. There are many examples out there, and they're not all progressing at the same rate, but they're all accelerating. And we need to stay focused, and we need to stay relevant. You need to stay current. So, final thoughts on digital citizenship. Thank you, Dr. Sharif.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks? And I want to invite you all in our countries, and hopefully you will enjoy uh, how we contributing in the grassroots level people through entrepreneurship initiative. So David Smith.
Well, Sharif, I cannot wait till I do get a chance to come to your country and visit with your folks. Uh, I cannot wait to get there. But to kind of go back and wrap up digital citizen and digital citizenship, the other place where digital citizenship makes a whole lot of sense is for people with disabilities. And this is a place where this digital world can be of tremendous support to them and help them understand their place. The other place I'd like to emphasize with digital citizenship that often gets overlooked, and it's so easy to do this, and I think it's one of the reasons it's overlooked so often, is don't plagiarize and don't use copyright materials in others. Just because articles, photos, videos, other content is online, that doesn't mean it's free to use. Uh, if a piece of online content was created and published by someone else, don't use it without their permission, unless it was created in a way that could give your permission because on it's used on social media. And so think before you post. Be aware of your digital footprint. That is so important today. As a digital citizen, it's your responsibility to be aware of what content and information of yours is online. What are your photos, videos, social media information, personal information, articles, other thing you've done? Be aware of what your digital footprint is, and also particularly be aware of what others have said about you that was not linked to you. I regularly go and do searches, and I have them set up in some of my DuckDuckGo search profiles to see what is said about me in places I don't normally go. And I've actually had to go and ask people to take some things down that were incorrect and wrong. And I've followed up on those to make sure they were done. So this whole access to your digital footprint is very important. And just the final comment here is it's very important for all ages and all social and economic backgrounds to understand digital citizenship because it's going to affect all of us. The use of social media is continuing to grow for all people. It's important for kids and adults to know how to use it appropriately, that what's there will tend to stay there. And there are consequences for the poor choices they make. I will tell you, I am so glad social media was not around when I was a kid, and some of the foolish things I did were not recorded to a medium like this, because they would sure have come back and bite me at this point in my life. But I don't think people understand. I've seen things that where I've been looking at to hire people who are in their early 20s. I go back and look at posts of them in high school and college, which makes me say these kids would not be good employees. Digital has a long lifetime, and we need to understand that and do it. Uh, you know, knowing proper digital citizenship can help prevent cyberbullying, and it also enables us to know how to report cyberbullying as well. You know, it also helps us learn how to communicate. How do we do proper communication with other professionals? How do we communicate with parents? How do we communicate with kids? Uh, it's important because digital citizenship helps teach all of us digital literacy skills, which are necessary to navigate today's digital and increasingly real-time connected world, and to use it to our advantage. And how do we maintain our digital health? How can we look at our screen time? You know, David talked about how he changes his mode of the blue in the screen as it goes to the evening. That's just part of digital health and how we as digital citizens know uh, that we have to do things with it there. So to me, digital citizenship is increasingly critical in our increasingly digital world. These are skills that we all need to let us engage in our professional life, our educational life, our social lives. And these are going to become even more important, like when David says, when we see augmented reality and virtual reality and the metaverse and all these new platforms emerging every few years. And, you know, as we understand it more, we can avoid online scams. We can avoid being radicalized and misinformation. And we need to contribute and stop cyberbullying and the other use. But equally important, and this is what I think the goal of digital citizenship is it can help us prepare people to use the internet positively, to inform, to create economic growth, to create innovation, to create education, to create governance for us and our cities, our states, our nation. And how can we participate in all these areas with confidence? It, if Dr. Talif was on here, he would say again, David, it's not just the people at the top, it's just not the companies, it's not the regulations, it's not the schools. It's how do we get digital citizenship trained to the citizens in the street? And to me, he is so right. We've got to be able to take this concept of digital citizenship not just to those, but understand there is a digital divide. And how do we educate everyone in the tools, techniques, processes, and why it's important to practice these good digital citizen principles? And Sharif, that's my concluding remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's session. I request all of our audience, please share our content with your government agency, corporation, and academy. World Talent Economy Forum. We are trying to improving human lives. It's very hard. It's very difficult. But we need all of your support, and with your support, definitely we can improve and human lives. I think Mr. David Schumacher want to share something. You want to share something, Mr. David Schumacher?
I just wanted to say thanks for another great show. I didn't really have anything to say other than you're doing a great job as usual, and thank you for continuing with these topics.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye bye and take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.